My dearest British people, there's something I'd like to say to you all about the upcoming EU referendum. And since my English is still a bit clumsy, I decided to write a letter and read it to you instead of talking off the top of my head so I can be as clear as possible because this is such an important matter. So this is my plea from one net payer of the EU to another. Since the British referendum is the first chance of a European nation to vote for leaving the EU, it'll set the tone on the discussion about the direction the rest of us are heading for too. Switzerland already said enough is enough. They withdrew their application for an EU membership. Norway has done just fine without the EU. And while the successful civilized countries are staying away from the EU, many completely different countries are flocking in. Turkey wants a membership and a visa freedom for its 75 million citizens. Since the direction has already been laid out years ago, EU is working towards Turkey's membership. It's only a matter of time when millions of poor people from this country, which has a GDP half smaller than that of the poorest current EU country, will be coming here for a better life. EU is also in membership negotiations with Serbia, Albania, Macedonia and Montenegro, and their membership would mean opening the doors to another 12 million poor people. Britain already has 1.6 million EU immigrants living within. We simply have to allow any people from any other EU country to come in. This mass immigration is making short work of employment in Britain too. It's estimated that 75% of lost jobs in Britain have been lost because of the EU. Britain is a choice destination for both EU migrants and people outside the EU, largely because English is a commonly spoken language. It's not only the immigrants who worsen the employment rate of Britain, it's the EU policies on competition. None of us are allowed to protect our businesses and production with tariffs for foreign goods or support for local goods, so cheap labor and cheap production can't be competed with. Living is becoming more and more expensive with the out-of-control immigration. Rich who can afford their own home are becoming fewer, and workers can't afford to live in the cities where their jobs are. When you boost the demand by pushing thousands and thousands of new people to the housing market every year, obviously prices will go up. With a tighter immigration policy, a sustainable population growth, and a housing market that doesn't price out our own young people and families can be achieved. Because multiculturalism is the policy of the EU, and the politicians we voted in and who should be accountable to us are not serving the public but the EU elite. Crime by the Muslim migrants is being covered up, the terrible side effects of mass immigration are downplayed, and protecting the multiculturalist bubble from bursting is prioritized over the safety of us EU citizens. As long as we are in the EU, electing immigration-critical politicians won't help us at all. The rules are still set by Brussels, and our leaders will have to obey. This is only going to get worse. EU is steadily building itself into the United States of Europe, so we're only going to have less and less power to decide about our own national matters. The Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership will steal the rest of our control over our matters. It's not only lost jobs immigration causes. The cultural changes are already painfully visible, and soon the effects will be irreversible. Muslim migrants bring with them a culture, a religion, and a system of values which are absolutely incompatible with our own. We're told fairy tales about integration and vibrant diversity, but it doesn't work. There's not a single country in the world history which would have become stronger and more successful with strong internal diversity. Diversity only brings suspicion, tension, and hatred, and it's getting worse by the minute. I don't want to see our truly diverse European cultures turn into a grey mass of Islamic culture from Cyprus to Lapland. Behind the Mediterranean, there are millions of more people aiming for Europe. The million-plus asylum seekers of last year were only the beginning. There are over 1 billion people living in extreme poverty and in war zones, so the million taken in won't change a thing. These billion people aren't just going to forget we are here, so they'll keep coming. EU wants to create a system in which all asylum decisions and immigration policies are made in Brussels. We wouldn't have any control over our national borders anymore, nor over who we accept into the country. There are an estimated 300 to 600,000 illegal immigrants in the UK too. They can only live off crime or black market work, which both are destructive to the country. And it's a simple fact that terrorism goes hand in hand with Islam and this mass immigration of Muslims. 98.9% of the 696 terrorist attacks this year were committed by Muslims. Last year in Europe, the entire death toll of terrorism, 150 people, were killed by Muslims. In USA, Muslims have killed Americans in terrorist attacks at 7,000 times the rate non-Muslims have during this millennium. It's a fact that even with the most rigorous background checks, we can't prevent terrorism because real Syrian IDs are for sale for a couple of $100, and we have no control over the second or third generation immigrants who might radicalize, like the Orlando shooter in the US or the ISIS attackers in Paris. We have to put things right. As nations, we should be able to make our own policy decisions, protect our businesses, jobs, agriculture and fishing. We should be able to decide who we let in our countries. The only way to get there is to break down the EU and continue living as free sovereign nations, cooperating as truly independent countries with local democratic decision-making at the center. The Remain camp says we need to be unified, but we can be unified without the EU too. We don't need this colossal anti-democratic organ that enslaves us all to have some sense of common European values and interests. You should think about why the Remain camp is being so vague and so extreme. Why do they flash completely absurd notions, such as World War III, or not being able to work in any other EU country anymore? Just like the No Borders people and the refugees welcome crowd, the Remainers want to guide you by emotions because they know they'd never get you to make the same decision with rational arguments. They are trying to scare people into submission. And I'm not going to bullshit you by saying there will be no negative consequences in Brexit. The market will take a temporary dive because that's how the market generally reacts to any big changes. The market is allergic to uncertainty. But once things have cooled down, the markets will start to rise, employment will start getting better, the immigration will be better under control, and all those programs EU gave money for can be substituted with the money UK saves with Brexit. You will have more money to go around, and instead of sending billions to Brussels, you can use that in projects that actually make the lives of Brits better. I know the pro-establishment media is bombarding you with articles on how Brits are the black sheep of EU. They are trying to make it appear as if everyone else is in agreement about EU, but you're the ones holding it back. And most likely they'll try to tell you that the outcome is an embarrassment to the UK. That's how the media plays all people who want to make a decision the EU doesn't like. Here in Finland, media is suppressing stories about Switzerland withdrawing its EU membership application, and they're also suppressing all stories about other nations who want a referendum of the positive consequences of Brexit. They're trying to send a message to Eurosceptic Finns, just as your media is trying to send a message to you. You're alone on this, everyone is against you, and you should fall in line. That's false. That's like their version of the Emperor's new clothes. There could be a much wanted referendum in all EU countries, and still they'd claim nobody outside your country feels like you do. We all see what the Emperor is wearing, so don't buy into the media lies that try to make it seem as if the rest of EU citizens are looking at Britain scornfully for Brexit. They're also trying to play all emotional factors they possibly can, such as the tragic murder of MP Joe Cox. That's just more of the same trickery, and honestly very immoral. The only things that should matter when you make a decision are the pros and cons of being in the EU. I want Brexit because it'll be a sort of a door opener. Other nations will take a look at UK leaving, Switzerland opting to withdraw its membership application, and they'll wonder why they are still in. With one net payer going, other net payers will have to bring more money in, so EU will become even more harmful to those net payer countries. People will want referendums in other countries, and that'll be our shot at creating a truly democratic Europe. Brexit could be the first massive blow to the very foundations of the EU. EU is becoming more overbearing, more controlling, and more fascist by the minute, so now's the time to go if we want to leave the EU while the damage is still repairable. Let the Germans keep paying to keep up the EU if they like, but we don't have to. Europe rose into a great world power and a beacon of technological development and culture way before the EU, and we can thrive without it now. Actually, the only way to hold on to those Enlightenment values of equality, justice and democracy is to do it as free nations. I'm sick and tired of seeing one country after another turn into a branch office of the EU, with cuck politicians who only know how to say why we can or can't do something because of the EU. Life hasn't gotten any better with the EU, it's gotten so much worse in many ways. So Brits, please do us all a favour, and please vote out.